Hello friend, today we're going to talk about business. I assume that you have read the title, so who is this video for? Hopefully you're here because you have some interest in self-publishing some type of deck. That's going to be the focus of it, although there may be things that are applicable to other types of products, such as something like a tapestry, as shown behind me. This is a product that I currently have available. This is for both people who are established artists or consider themselves to be so, and for complete novices or people who consider themselves not to be artistically inclined or have no art skills. That's really not a problem. It's not necessary to do this, and art is very subjective, and it's a skill that can be acquired quite quickly. So if you're not quite there yet, don't worry about it. That's not really going to be the bulk of the work anyway, which is a mixed blessing, as we'll come to find out. So you're here because perhaps you have some savings set aside and are looking to invest, or if you don't and you want this to be completely risk-free. Nothing is ever truly risk-free. Of course, you're going to be out some effort, but it is possible to fully crowdfund something like this. So even if you don't have savings set aside, it is still possible to make it happen via the magic of the internet. And I will outline nitty-gritty details on how to do either approach. Who else is this video for? Just if you have any interest whatsoever in product development and want kind of a glance at maybe a different kind of product, or you're just looking to expand your horizons and think about what useful objects there are to put out in the world, I commend you. That's also a good thing to read up on and educate. I, every once in a while to do this, will partake in those SEO webinars, you know, those business things you scroll through Facebook and you see the link for the free, this is how you can expand your income to 6 figs or whatever. I like to check on what people are doing with those every so often, and this one really got me, and it had a couple of points that I wanted to touch on and turn into a video, so kudos to that person. The main takeaway from those type of videos is a lot of them are not selling even like real things. This person was selling Photoshop templates, and not to be too judgmental on her, I'm sure she's a lovely person, but didn't really seem like she was even doing the clip art frame weirdness that was going on those. So I would say like the amount of value that that's bringing into the world is perhaps quite minimal, and we should maybe not do that too much, and definitely I wouldn't suggest that as a viable way to earn your way in this world. Let's focus on actually solving some problems. That was the one somewhat, I mean, usually you watch those and it's like 45 minutes of nonsense, and then there will be maybe one little point. The one point that she did make, which is somewhat trendy to say in business, is that, you know, a product is something that is solving a problem for someone. And as long as you emphasize that and put that first and foremost, then you're going to be, you know, a CEO or whatever they say. That's not entirely true. It's kind of a weird angle, but it's kind of a fun angle, so I thought maybe we could mess with that a little bit. So what is the problem that a deck looks to solve for a person? We'll get to that in then the second section. But first off, let's just look at the options that you have before you as far as why self-publish, why take on the risk, why do that versus traditional publishing, what are the pros and cons. So just very briefly, self-publishing gives you a lot of creative freedom, a lot of control over your product, how it looks and what it does. You don't have the risk of rejection from the publishing company, at least. Of course, you can still fail when it comes to crowdfunding or just moving your units in general. You know, there's no free lunch. It is still a risk, but self-publishing, you don't have to conform to what is meta in the market for that industry. You have much better profit margin. Of course, you're not just squeaking by with meager royalties. You know, you're making whatever markup you would like to put on your product after you wholesale your printing. And it also gives you the opportunity to synergize with other products that you may have, to build up branding, and create perhaps a bundle. Maybe this is a product that you're adding to actually push a different product in your suite that is what your actual bread and butter is comprised of. I saw a really great example the other day. It was the Great Lakes Oracle, I think. And they just had such a great swath of products. They sold, crystals, in particular, like indigenous, kind of, partial to the region, I guess you would say. But they had, Petoskey stones and copper chunks and, minerals and things that are native to the region. And they had the deck, and they were just a great company, engaged in lots of sustainable practices, and just a very swanky presentation. It was very on brand. It was very cozy. It was very #Pure Michigan, and I appreciated that. So, perhaps you're adding a deck. This is kind of a one-off thing that you're doing to flesh out the rest of your identity and your brand. And, maybe it's something that you're offering alongside services. Maybe you're actually a reader and you are looking to self-publish a deck as like, the culmination of your reading experience and what you've found to be effective and your takeaways from using lots of other products and finding what is particularly effective. So those are great angles to take for self-publishing. You might not be able to get those benefits if you did publish traditionally. It would be more about you being in their suite of products and promoting their publishing house and their brand identity. Becoming kind of one in a trillion, and that can have its advantages too. So the main reason why you might want to do that approach is you get a huge advantage when it comes to the distribution channels available to you and actually getting the product out there, gaining notoriety and familiarity, building your brand just as like an author and expanding the possibilities of offers that you might then get in the future from other publishers or the same one. Huge marketing advantage, especially with things like Amazon. I will say up front here, I haven't found Amazon to be a effective channel. Their seller support is non-existent at best, quite awful. So if you're looking to do even self-publishing on Amazon, maybe it's better for ebooks, but certainly for what I've done, it's a nightmare just as far as like the errors and the setbacks and inability to get hold of an agent or get anything. Don't recommend it. But if you go the traditional route, you don't have to worry about all that. Amazon's kind of an automatic, so you can really touch a wider audience if you go that route. There's also just the incredible passivity of that revenue stream. It's just something, royalties that are deposited to your account. You don't have to do order fulfillment. You don't have to take up a lot of room in your house to store boxes of product. All of that's taken care of for you. You don't have to worry about shipping. That's a serious advantage if you have any sort of mobility limitations or anything like that. Self-publishing might not be the best option for you if you have trouble like lifting heavy boxes. You do have to do some of that and, unloading things. It's cumbersome, right? It's wholesale. So keep that in mind. Also, traditional publishing might afford you different travel opportunities. I haven't experienced too much of this myself, and I think it's slightly more common, with books and things, but there may be possibilities as an author of decks to perhaps go on behalf of your publisher to make some sort of appearance, do a talk or a signing or something like that, and go to a convention and sell there. You also have access, usually through your publisher, to negotiate some sort of wholesale rate with them to buy your own decks and to distribute them, on your channels as well, while still having the bulk of it be done by them. So that's pretty awesome. So this isn't necessarily, would you go left or right situation, right? We have an option, which is what I'm mostly going to be talking about today and what I use, which is a hybrid approach, which is to start out with self-publishing for, perhaps your first, maybe even second runs, and get everything established and make your the initial amount of your markup and go through kind of one cycle of it, and then doing this and establishing your proof of concept, having, you know, a well-received product that you can have reviews and feedback from when you're then going to go ahead and approach a publisher, makes it infinitely easier and really eliminates any worry that you might have about not getting accepted, because a publisher is going to be very wary if you are an unknown newcomer, you know, and you don't have any track record. Of course, they're extremely cautious these days, perhaps more so than ever. It's a very saturated market. There's a lot of competition, and, you know, COVID has definitely thrown a monkey wrench in the equation, both on like the distributor end and the production end. It's just tough, you know. So a publisher would be reasonably concerned about somebody who has, you know, not published anything at all or done anything at all. But if you walk in there and you're like, hey, I had a successful Kickstarter, I sold 500 units, here are some of the reviews and what people think of this product, would you be interested in representing me? And that not only are you entitled to a higher negotiating base rate for, you know, having done all of the work and having it be ready to go, but you have this proof of concept, and it's very safe, so your chance of acceptance is very high, and you've already made, you know, your initial run money. You've already got that in your pocket, and then you can just let this product go out into the market and continue to pay its dividends passively, but without you having to continue to do all the heavy lifting, literal and metaphorical, of distributing the deck. So, you know, it's kind of, it's a bonus, like being paid twice, you know, and you can go through however many cycles you want to of self-publishing. You know, maybe you start out with 500 units, and maybe when you go back for a reprint, maybe you do some edits in the second edition or incorporate some things, or maybe you leave it completely the same and you just buy 1,000 this time, you know, and then maybe something in your life changes and you move, you have less space to store things, you just don't want to do it anymore, you want to make room for another deck, you want to go through the cycle again. So that's fine. You go, you publish, and, you know, then it's just really great. It's a win-win. You get all of the benefits of both sides of the equation. So that's what we're mostly going to be talking about. So now back to this, what problem does it solve? What is the concept of an oracle deck or a tarot deck or study deck? What are these, and what's the difference between them, and why would you pick one over the other? Those are going to be the three main ones that we talk about. Tarot being, you know, first and foremost, is pretty self-explanatory. One big reason that you would choose to do a tarot deck is they're so well established, people know how to use them. There are not a lot of users out there and a lot of educational material, so it's not like you necessarily need to write a guidebook or have a whole thing about it. You know, yours doesn't need to be divergent from a tarot classic. It could be exactly as the system is and do perfectly well. So it's very recognizable. It has its drawbacks of you will run into people who are resistant to the entire concept because, you know, tarot is the devil and you'll go to hell and all that good stuff. But if you're already in this boat watching this video, I feel like that's probably been there, done that, got the t-shirt, saved me a seat kind of territory at this point. So the main drawback of tarot, and what I'm kind of running into right now, I'm working on a tarot deck, and it is unfortunately a huge commitment of time, especially if you're doing a traditional medium. It's 78 cards. It's a buttload of cards. I say that my other decks, two of them have more cards than that, but if you're actually like fully illustrating, which is usually what tarot calls for because it's a very symbolic kind of card, you know, very visually heavy, then you're gonna be in for the long haul. And we'll talk right now. Why not right now? If you want to get an idea just up front here of kind of what the design time frame might be like for these different types of decks. Tarot, if you're doing like a traditional illustration, I'm on schedule to do in 6 to 8 months to illustrate an entire deck in watercolor. That's what I'm supposed to be doing right now. But I was like, you know what, let's make a video today. That's what I'm in the mood for. So here's like a half-done one I have to finish. I'm putting out, on a real good week, 4 cards a week. So that's kind of the pacing that you might come to expect for yourself if you're going that route. If you're doing digital art, you might be able to streamline your production and make it a bit faster or what have you. So I think it's reasonable for, I think, either medium to possibly get it down to 4 to 6 months, but that's, I think, pretty generous. You're going to be working a very long time if you're doing an entire tarot deck. If you are going at it as an established artist and you already have art that you have started accumulating that you want to apply to a tarot deck, you've already been, maybe selling, prints of your work and you want a more tactile, useful product, and so you've considered doing a tarot deck. Even if you have some art already done for it, it's still a major time investment, but definitely worthwhile to do, to have one of those in your roster. I don't have the money numbers for that as of yet, of course, because this deck isn't done, so I'll do an update in the future to let you know how that is going. But based on just the concept, you might expect maybe, twice the amount. I'm planning on doing a print run of 1,000 quantity for this one, so maybe more in the realm of like 50 grand profit, if you want to think of it that way. I think that makes sense for the time expenditure, and so you might be having similar thoughts of like you could spend less time on the front end and have more products and more variety, and that's really advantageous because people typically want to have options to say no to. And if you have a booth and you have multiple offerings, for the most part they're going to be like, oh, which one do I want, not do I want a deck. If you just have one for display, this is the problem that we found with the tapestries, actually, is like perfectly good tapestry, like it definitely stands on its own, but because it had no competition within our own set of offerings, people didn't have a choice between them, so then they were grappling with that, do I even want a tapestry question. So if you want to have a shorter cycle, that might be a consideration for you in that upfront investment. But yeah, tarot has lots of advantages as far as being something that people are very actively pursuing and looking for. Already having a system established, you don't have to teach anybody like a whole new system or design one, so maybe you're spending more time on illustrations but less time on concept. So there's all these trade-offs you have to consider, but that's the general gist of why you would pick tarot. Why you would pick an oracle deck. I have a couple different styles that I have available right now. So this one is much more concept heavy, less art heavy. The art is somewhat unified, and each of the cards doesn't have like a unique image, so it's very much more work on the back end of the design. And I don't remember exactly how long. I think this took 3 months to when we actually sat down to kind of decide this was a product and get this going. A lot of the just the initial idea of the system behind it and the spreadsheet behind it is much older, and I can't say how long that took. But the design phase was about 3 months of collaborative effort between my partner and I to come up with that type of deck. And then this one, 80 cards illustrated. They were watercolor first and then digitally enhanced. And that took a couple months, I think, a month and a half, something like that, to get those done. And then lots more time on formatting after. This has been reformatted a few different times to come to its final conclusion, which is not the final. I'm probably going to redo it and overhaul again. So, something like that, about a couple months as well. And the third option that I'll just give you the time frame for, and then we'll go back to the concept, was actually just a couple of weeks, and then another week or so formatting after. This one was much more of an assembly line, and It has both the watercolor hand-painted illustrations and a lot of research, so it was very back-end heavy again. But I sort of took a couple of weeks off from regular work, and I was like, look, I'm just going to bang this thing out. And so I treated this like a full-time job for a couple of weeks and was able to get it done. So there's lots of different ways to do it. These other ones were kind of more side projects on top of my existing work. So you can do them if you already have a job or as a side hustle. Or if you really want to, like, nose to the grindstone, crack down and get it done, theoretically they can be done in less than a month, if that's really how you want to go. So an oracle deck, you need to really think about its usage and the system behind it, and like what works about it. And you can do this by practicing with another person and bouncing ideas off them and making a mock-up and really seeing how this type of thing works in practice. There's lots of different bases that you can use for an oracle deck, but basically when you're using tarot or divination or oracle decks, it's not really psychic. It's not really, I know some people are going to be triggered from me saying this, right? It's not predictive. You are doing a sort of therapy, the same as would be used with like a Rorschach test, right? You're using an image to evoke a connection and to spur on a conversation, and a reader is guiding a client through their own process of self-realization. Maybe they're making connections about their situation that they hadn't before, or looking at it from a different point of view. Maybe they just need to talk about it out loud to someone to sort of come to acceptance about it themselves. They're really verifying things that they already know. It's not like some magic from the ether insight into their situation, right? Deep down somewhere, perhaps very hidden in their subconscious, perhaps it has not been consciously brought to light at all, but through this guided experience and exchange with another person, they're combining the way that they're talking about their story with insight from the reader and maybe experiences that they've had that are applicable, through the storytelling they're coming to some insight about their life and their goals and their situation. So keeping in mind that is the purpose of a tarot or oracle deck, how do you design one well to do that? How do you make it facilitate that conversation? And of course, for the previous example, the ink blots, you can do with anything. People will, look at the stars and make some connection and tell a story about it. We're very good storytellers. So, keep in mind, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't take much. But if you do really put some work in to begin with to make sure that the cards that you're creating are in service of that end, then I think you will have a very well-received and well-used product. Like Stan Lee says, when you're writing a story, you should write one that you would want to read. So the huge impetus for my first deck was that this was something that was living as a spreadsheet for years, and I kept referring back to and using a lot, and I came to wish it was more accessible. So I was like, well, I want it to be on flashcards so I can just pick them up and mess with them and organize them. And I was like, well, I want them to be different colors that sort of have a system and make sense, so I can, because I love sorting colors, I love sorting M&Ms and stuff, And that idea just kind of got out of hand and came to life as a product, and I started to think, maybe other people would like this too. Maybe they could use it too. And that's very much been the case. We've gotten overwhelming positive feedback about how much use people are getting out of it. So that is based on astrology and elements. It's very heavy on those for its foundation, for its structure. So when you're thinking about building this oracle deck, you can make references to other things the tarot does, such as elements, such as suits, and that can be helpful to make it compatible with these other cards, especially if you're wanting them to act as clarifiers, which that one is specifically a clarity deck, so it is deeply compatible with a tarot way of thinking. Although that's not to say that you can't be more original and come up with something based on a different system. You could have it be something like I Ching. You could have it be something like Enneagram. It could be even, a different base number in numerology, and not, follow this cycle of 4 and things. You just have to kind of make a decision about that to begin with, and really buckle down and commit to it and keep it consistent, and then you'll have a nice result. So that one is much more dry, technical. The work is all on the back end and on the system. The Fable Oracle is much more about storytelling and imagery. So each one has a unique image and an evocative aphorism that is supposed to spur conversation and perhaps remind people of something that their mom or grandpa or whoever used to say. And so they've got these little phrases on them to spark a conversation. And that's another way to facilitate the connection between the reader and the client. And I leaned very heavily on that phenomenon and tried to keep it very playful and conversational in that deck instead of maybe as rigid and technical as the first one. Both very effective. People love both of them, But it's good when you're an author to kind of have a variety. The other one can be used as an oracle deck, but for the most part it's more of a study deck. But to wrap up this topic of oracles, you want to really lay a solid foundation and figure out what the basis of it is. Maybe if you're going from a much more artistic angle, you want the imagery to really be what people are sucked into and focus on for getting clarity in a reading. Like, you want the person to be really spend some time in this world that you've crafted in the image, and that by having this experience that they'll notice details about it and be kind of drawn, so perhaps you have a lot of like landscape imagery or dreamy imagery. That's a structure in and of itself. So maybe even if you don't have like numerology involved very much, especially if you're an existing artist who's telling a story that you already frequently tell through your paintings or illustrations or what have you, maybe you already have your system of the way that you tell that story, and that's what's coming to life in the cards. So don't feel, just because I'm very regimented, I'm not saying that's the only way to do it. I'm just saying pick your system, pick your angle, and just apply it. Because the only thing that you really don't want with an oracle deck is to be really kind of sporadic and all over the place. We all know a deck that's like that, where it's just like one of these things is not like the other, and you have kind of odd cards out that are just like, what? Just this person was just throwing everything in and hoping it sticks kind of thing. You don't want that. You want everything to have a place and be purposeful and work with the other things and, create a nice, concise experience for the person who is using that deck. Also keep in mind, if you are doing an oracle deck like that, that's got your system, you're going to have to explain in detail and provide, people do really prefer having a booklet in the box. If it's that kind of format, you're going to be doing a lot of writing in book form if you don't provide a lot of explanation on the card, or you're relying more on imagery on the card. You will have to do some kind of follow-up. And so the third type of deck, the study deck, I think is maybe what I would actually encourage the most for newcomers, because there's a lot of demand in the market and not a whole lot of supply. And I think educational material is just always a thing that we should be producing more than we need of. More is always better. So I was looking through and I saw a deck that was something like, illustrations to help teach sign language. Things like that are awesome. We need infinitely more of that, or things that are teaching, culture in some way, or representing really different art styles, or like helping to bring things into awareness, because there's something very tactile and crunchy about cards that you just can't get through with a book. And also the age universality of cards cannot be understated. If you are looking to have the widest possible audience, doing educational material in that form is really great, because of course children may not be able to get through a whole book, and certainly not a textbook, but kids can pick up flashcards and use them, and can be used with adults. It's very difficult to use a book with a person. What do? You both go and read it and you talk about it afterwards. But cards, you can sit, you can touch, you can play, you can exchange, you can point out. It's very demonstrative. So I highly recommend producing study cards that maybe can also be used to pull for clarity or something like that. So that's kind of what I shot for with this deck, which is about neuroscience. There's a lot of definitional stuff on it, very educational and dry, but also I tried to be quite expressive with the art portion so that it had kind of some mixed utility. But especially with the topic, studying emotion, the idea of having flashcards for that or study, I think is kind of fresh, or at least that's what I'm hoping for. But, I'm sure there's something that you can think of, even if you don't, if you're not vibing and relating on the oracle or tarot card route. I'm sure there's something that that other people maybe aren't as familiar with. Maybe it's something like mushroom identification or foraging. There's lots of decks that are about things like that. Even if you're like, oh, I don't want to do this because it's just another crystal deck and there's so many crystal decks. Yeah, there's a lot of sucky crystal decks. Yours might be better. Don't refrain from doing it just because you're worried that there's other things out there. Like, there's room in the market to have multiple things. And especially if it's for teaching, more the merrier. It would be nice to have, as a buyer, to have some choice and to be able to compare and, find out what really works. And what works for one person may not work for another person. They're very personal things, and that applies to the oracle decks too. You are creating a very personal object that someone is going to be using as a tool. That's the thing that I think is so magical about decks, is it's like a shovel, it's like a rake, it's a tool that people are using to get to this outcome, and sort things, So it's like in the same way in like a Zen garden, someone is taking a rake and making these patterns with rocks or sand or whatever. You're organizing things with cards in a way that just passively consuming information from a book doesn't do. So cards are very magical, very powerful, regardless of whether it's a tarot deck or not. Even study cards are very powerful. It's still, what do they say? Spelling is casting a spell. Like, yeah, words have power. And I haven't really talked about it very much at all, but I'm actually having my first deck published in Spanish. We partnered with a translator to make sure everything would be authentic in that native language and come through as being actually relevant and applicable in tarot setting. She actually is a reader as well, so that was really awesome that we were able to find someone who could offer such an authentic connection to making a product that would really be useful. I think even just translating, even just making things available in other languages, even offering study cards just in other languages is so important, and there's all of these other swaths of young and eager to learn pagans who maybe don't have English as their first language, so even making decks available in other languages. Largely untapped market as well. Not that that's the main point, but if you're looking for something to get into, please don't feel limited just because you're not a painter and you don't want to go with the traditional tarot route. There's all these other options. So let's talk about some designs considerations up front. What are you going to have to factor in before you even embark on this? So that what you're signing up for when you make a deck. It's not just the cards. You also have to factor in the back of the cards. Seems obvious, but you have to make yourself a to-do list and actually come up with all of these things. Put some thought into the branding of the back of the cards. There's a lot of decks that just have not really great backs to cards, and you're seeing them a lot, so it probably would be better if some effort was put in on that. You're going to have to design a box. You're going to have to make it really clear what's inside the box, from the outside. You're going to have to potentially create a website or a resource where people can go to see if you make guide videos or how to use this product kind of thing. Someplace that has previews or a contact form if people have questions. So you may want to, we always do, link the deck with its homepage and have resources available online in this day and age. It's kind of inescapable. QR codes, very simple, very good to do. So you're gonna have to think about that. Where is that going? You can always just get your URL ready, have the QR code direct there. You don't have to have the website completely done by the time you launch, but get that stuff figured out before you do the print run. Let's see, the box. Oh, you need to think about what size. There's certain standards. There's a standard tarot size. I think what is it? 2 3/4 by 4 3/4 or whatever. Standard tarot size. This is an oracle deck. It's tarot size. It's a little funky. Is that the best? I have no idea, but it's what we're going with, and it seems to work pretty well. But think about this before you start designing, because the aspect ratio you're going to get locked into, and especially with illustration, the cropping might not go your way if you're not sort of thinking about that beforehand. You also want to think about your resolution, making sure it's nice and high. So you're going to need to work a lot bigger if you're doing traditional digital. Not so big a deal. You can kind of correct that depending on what your workflow is like. But illustration, you want to make sure you're working large, so when it gets shrunk down, it retains a lot of detail and doesn't look blurry. Don't try to do it true to size. It doesn't work. Think about your scanning method ahead of time. I got a new 4 all-in-one or whatever, and with a scanner, and tried it with my watercolors. I've always had a hell of a time getting watercolors to scan well. It didn't go well. I'm gonna have to find a different way. But you need to maybe think about that. Are you going to photograph with a quality camera? Are you going to use a scanner? Certain mediums do better on different methods. Actually, it's weird to think about, but you want to. You don't want to be caught with that later on. So think about the size. Think about the aspect ratio. Are you going to have a traditional oracle card size? I don't have one handy, but they're much wider. So you can also get regular playing card size. Not very applicable if you're doing art. Of course, you want it to be larger if you're doing the whole painting or whatever. But if you've just got text, playing card size is great for flashcards or great for really text-based cards. It's so nice to have really manageable tiny cards. Full-size oracle cards, kind of hard to shuffle typically. Why the decks are smaller, it affects your print cost. So you want to think about your sizes, what those options are. And there's lots of other cool custom sizes out there. I've seen, I have no idea what this size is called, but they're usually like, they're like little, I don't know, they're really skinny, and they're really like, I think tarot length, but then like really skinny. I don't know what they're called. Super cute. I've seen those around a lot. There's also, you can get circle cut cards. Gonna add to your cost, but very cool. You can get, square aspect cards, and there's just all these cool custom things that you can do to set your deck apart. Gilded edges, foil stamping, all those kind of upgrades may be available depending on who you use. You want to think about that beforehand. Obviously, if you're doing foil stamping, you're going to want to maybe keep it monochrome. I originally designed the Stellar Fable thinking I was going to foil stamp, and in looking at a mock-up of it, it was like, oh, this is just too much with the full color, and it's too much. It's not really reading. It's not really adding anything, and it's doubling the price. Why am I doing that? It's like, and for that sort of gilded look, you may want to keep your background minimal. Let's talk about the cost. That's why you're here, right? We want to talk about some numbers. What is there to expect? So as stated in the title, I really rounded those numbers across all of these decks. That's sort of the average, just to kind of give you really memorable, easy, chunky numbers to look at. So you're going to be spending about $5,000. That's between the production, getting it shipped to you, all the advertising, going through the crowdfunding, the fees off the crowdfunding campaign if you use one, seller fees if you're going through a marketplace and things like that. It's It'd be about $5,000, something like that. Now, I highly recommend that you just have that up front and are just willing to gamble that and are at peace with paying that. I find that to be the best way to go about that. I use profit from my other business to then reinvest, right? Because I invest a portion from my other business in its own products and materials, and then I also have a portion set aside for investment. Yeah, I don't do Bitcoin or bank stuff. I think this rate is better, and that's, maybe I'm wrong, but so far it seems to be working out pretty good. So I consider it like that to just be an investment. And if you pay that, the profit margin, so the $25,000 listed is like what you're making profit. So your gross would be the $30,000 or whatever, based on 500 units. If you buy more, the unit cost is less, and you have more to play with, and the shipping is more. So, you're going to have to go get your own quote and actually do the research and figure out what it's going to be for your product, but those numbers are just for you to have in your head so you know what to expect and don't get blindsided. Are there other ways to invest $5,000 that could turn out better or different? Absolutely. I met a gentleman who based his business around once a year he would go to Africa, and he had a craftsman there that he would work with to make a batch of dashikis, and he would bring them back and sell at festivals. And he said you want to have $5,000 to $7,000 on hand to go someplace like Africa or India, and that there are people that you could work with and potentially learn a skill and produce your wholesale units in any number of industries. It could be clothing, it could be handicrafts, it could be incense, it could be going and mining crystals yourself. If you've got $5,000 to blow, there's a lot of things that you could do with it. So I understand, like, this might not be your cup of tea, but if based on the things we've talked about so far, this sounds like kind of how you want to go, that's a realistic expectation. You can't get this 100% covered on crowdfunding. It's going to slow your time frame down of fulfillment, but that's fine to do, and people, I think, have come to expect it. When you go to do crowdfunding, typically it's going to take a couple weeks from the time of submission to get the project evaluated and approved, so keep an eye out for that. To actually put a Kickstarter campaign together varies widely. It depends how much work you want to put into it, but you're probably going to want to have a video. Video is pretty standard. Sometimes they're a lot of work. Sometimes you do a lot of work and it doesn't really add any value, so you have to figure that out, yourself. But I put way too much effort in the Fable video, and it's just, look, I learned. But you don't necessarily, you just need to convey your product very accurately, give people really realistic expectations of what it's going to be like, preferably show previews of every single thing. I don't think it works as well to do a campaign where you're where the project is not completed. It is possible to do it. I wouldn't recommend doing it just because Kickstarter is kind of notorious for not being super trustworthy, and people falling flat on campaigns and not delivering and things like that. So I think just the very best way to go and the most ethical is just have the project complete, show every part of it. You can be speculative with the stretch goals or other things like that if those aren't complete or there's other things you want to do. Totally, but I think whatever you are promising to fulfill should be shown in full up front, I think. It's just my opinion. So, factor that into your time frames. You're gonna spend at least a week or two just putting the campaign together and, figuring out all your shipping estimates and how that's gonna go, and making it look nice and writing it up. So you might spend a month just in pre-launch and getting your promotion campaign figure out your advertising budget if you want to do that, or if you're going to do more of the legwork yourself. I can't really attest to the success of like either Facebook, Instagram, Reddit ads. None of them seem to work. Google ads seem to be the worst for me, at least. Maybe I'm just really bad at it and I'm doing it wrong. This video is not about the advertising side of it. You probably want to do some, but don't ask me what the best way to do that is. I haven't found it yet, but keep in mind that's going to be part of the process if you're going through crowdfunding. And also factoring into that cost is the fees on sales platforms. Etsy's got, I forget what it even is now, like 9 or 10% or whatever it is. I don't know, might be more. That they're going to take off. So, keep those things in mind when you're thinking about your markup, you're thinking about how much you want to charge. Typically your unit price for any of these kind of decks is going to be about $5 a pop. So, when you think about your markup, you've put all of the work into that. Are you going to be able to recoup that hourly? It really depends on how you think about it or look at it. You could certainly try to keep track of it that way and see how that crunches out, but I don't like math and I don't really want to know. So I just kind of put that out of my mind, focus on like, okay, it costs this much, I'm going to mark it up to $20, $25. My prices vary depending on if it's an in-person sale versus an online sale, because the fees are different, so you factor that in. It's a good idea if you're at a festival to be transparent about if there's processing fees when they go to use a card and sales tax and all those kind of things. Always good to be upfront and honest, but with yourself as well. Make sure that you're accounting for that, factoring that in. If you're going to be backing sales tax off later and remitting it, think about, don't undercharge yourself just to try to get the sale. That's never going to end well. People on the whole want things to make sense and be fair. They don't just want the cheapest possible option out there. And if you're trying to be the cheap one to get more sales or be the one that people pick over other things, it's not a really great formula. I don't recommend it. I wouldn't go that route. I have, with other products, it's like, oh, well, I'm new in the market. I should be humble and have a lower price. It just doesn't end up, you get bad reviews, you get problems, there's just a bad juju to it. So I would say you just figure out what's fair. And a markup on a product that you did all of the work for and all of the design for, hourly rate aside, 4 to 5 times your unit price is more than reasonable. And obviously I charge differently for the different products depending on how much work went into their development, and a lot of work products cost more. Making sense is important, and some of them do have higher production costs than that $5 unit price, so that's factored in. If you're following along at home and doing math, if you've run the Kickstarter for a month and it's going to take 2 months to get the product, really what you would want to do is order the product before you run the Kickstarter if you want the most expedient possible fulfillment. Now, not necessary to do so. Nobody expects you to do so. Doing so, I found is helpful for my sanity and peace of mind because I was going to do it anyway. I'm not really dependent on the Kickstarter. That's sort of just to cover the print costs, so I'm not out anything up front. But, it's kind of just another outlet, another audience that I wouldn't necessarily be getting through my normal means. So that's sort of like an extra on top thing. So I'm not waiting around for it. So for me, going ahead and getting it on order means very fast fulfillment. People love that. They leave really good feedback about, how quickly they receive it, and it just kind of helps your cred if you're going to be utilizing Kickstarter a lot, or that's going to be kind of a regular thing for you. It may behoove you to do that. For me, I just it takes a lot out to do this whole thing, and to be juggling that with an existing business, I sort of want it to kind of be in its box, doing its thing. I know what I'm signing up for. I know how much work it's going to take. I don't like when surprises happen. I have to go rework things and shoehorn that into my schedule. So I'm like, look, order it, get it fulfilled within a month's time of concluding it, and then that's going to be done and on the shelf. And then I'm moving on to do the other avenues that I'm going to be promoting that product on. For me, I use Etsy, and I would really love it if you guys do too. I know you're probably thinking like, why would you be teaching us how to get into this? It's not just going to oversaturate the market and edge you out and make more competition. Like, no, this is not a zero-sum game, okay? The more the merrier. The more Etsy becomes the place that people know to go and get independently published, unique decks and offerings that you can't get elsewhere, and ways to more directly support the publishers who are actually doing the research and taking the risk and making these things, the more that culture gets developed, the better for all of us, and the more it's going to synergize. And I love it when somebody can just type in the search Oracle deck and get a lot of really great options. That really fuels me. So I'm not intimidated by you. You're not going to come up and take my throne. It's not like that. We're all in this together, and for the buyer's sake, competition increases quality and helps, inform one another. It helps having the publisher have, or the, not traditional publisher, not publishing house, I mean the print company, having them have more business is actually helpful, even though it's, possibly booking them up and making times longer. It never does. They just handle it, but for them, it's like the more the merrier, because it communicates to them more and more that this is a market that they should be in. They invest more in their employees and their processes to take on more work, and they adapt and evolve. And, so that demand is creating that necessity being the mother invention, backbone of capitalism, that we're supposed to be subscribing to when we even go about this type of business venture. And the more participation, the more mindful participation that we have, the more opportunity that we have to do it ethically and to do it sustainably, and to start to make more demands that there be more, recycled paper options or what have you. So take up space in the market, seriously, like you are welcome. I build a longer table, not a taller fence, you are welcome here beside me. I would like your product to be there too. Thus the video. So we talked about the overall time frame of production. Now the time frame of fulfillment, I usually just buckle down and get it done. I kind of want that stuff to be out there as far as fulfilling the campaign. As far as expectations for fulfillment in the long run, as the title says, this is 25 grand over the course of a year. I'm currently on schedule for that. Please do keep in mind the sales rate. It's not necessarily linear. These things tend to be exponential, actually. I've found that most business, I've had my other business for 11 years, so there's kind of a tendency, and it's not all up and up and up. There's plateaus once you get to certain points, at certain benchmarks, but on the whole, you're going to have a really slow slog right in the beginning. You're going to get perhaps a bit of a boost from the Kickstarter, and that's going to maybe be what kind of propels your trajectory, but you have to keep on it, and you have to just commit and be at peace and accept it. It's not keep up on it, constantly be looking for new avenues and trying to market yourself and knock on doors and shoes on the pavement and all that kind of stuff. It's not necessarily that. Keep on it just means, post on social media just regularly. It doesn't have to be a whole thing, just give people the opportunity to interact with you. Accept the slowness at the beginning and know that it will, with consistency, ramp up. That's just the way it works. It's not even, it's up to you, if you're putting the effort, that's the inertia and the trajectory. So it will happen. So just know, in the beginning, we were maybe selling 1 a week, and then we were selling 3 a week. And now between both shops, because I do have redundancy with my first shop, because for some reason that's just working in the Etsy meta, and we don't really care where the money comes from. I'm sure you probably feel pretty similarly. It is really difficult to add an unrelated product to an existing store. Really annoying, not super great, but it's seems to be appealing to two completely different sets of audiences. It does create confusion when there's duplicate listings. I don't super advise it, but also hey, get that bread. Who am I to tell you, don't take their money? Wherever you're getting the sales, use that channel, obviously. But between both stores, we'll usually sell 1 or 2 a day. So that's keeping us on track to sell out either, within 9 months or within 12 months for that run of 500. at which point we'll reorder. And of course, because this is something that we've decided is kind of our thing, we've got multiple projects running at once. Just over the course of 1 year, we had these 3 decks, and I'm working on another tarot deck. There's other oracle decks kind of in the works that have been conceptualized and just need the work to be put in. Over at Studio Pandemonium, to actually build up that brand and build that up as, our other company. Partner is producing a prototype for another deck that is a study guide deck about astrology. So another one of those educational material kind of ones. Looking good. This is matte finish, so hopefully it's not blinding you with the reflectivity. If you're doing a starry or dark, go with a matte finish. The other one is glossy, and it's like kind of cool, but I don't know. It's a little slippery in the usage, and you gotta really think about the finish in part of your production step planning. I recommend, on the whole, matte. It seems to just shuffle it a little better, and people have different preferences. Some readers like the glossy. One big caution, though, with YouTube readers, if you're actually filming, especially if it's top down, if their camera is like so, if you use a really shiny gloss finish, you can have a lot of reflectivity. It can be shining back at the camera. It can be really hard to read. So keep that in mind if your target audience is, online readers or people who are doing readings through Zoom, because it might create difficulty in filming. I ignored that with one of my decks. It's, I think, okay, but I went with like a semi-gloss because I was concerned about that. But even that, it's like, be mindful. Be mindful always of the user experience, and wherever possible, get as much feedback, because they're going to let you know about those things that you might completely space and have no idea would be a problem. So that's the sales rate to maybe expect. If you're doing additional shows, or you're wholesaling to local stores or things like that, you can see, obviously spikes in your sales rate. The first time we went to one of the local stores, we sold like 10 decks. And then the next several times that we went, we sold maybe 1, if any. And so it's irregular, you're going to have spikes. It's not necessarily the most dependable. If you go do conventions, we sold that one this weekend, and we sold a couple of that same print. I think we sold four decks between our 3 different designs, which not super great for a convention of thousands of people. When you're trying to do a cost-benefit analysis about actually going and showing in person, I would say like the thing to be the most cautious about is the value of your time. Because, the table fee is one thing, it's overhead. The gas, the food, the hotel, those are all overhead, but your time, if you're going and sitting at like a local store, like maybe it didn't really cost you anything to be there, but if you're going to be sitting there for 8 hours out of the day that you could be painting dinosaurs, you're out. They cost you to be there. Yeah, so you really have to be careful about that, and not, and maybe you may think, oh, well, I'm just starting out, I really need to promote this deck, I gotta put myself out there, and no, you don't. You don't have to. You have to weigh the costs against the benefits. You don't necessarily have an obligation to just show up and hustle in that traditional way. And that's coming from me. I'm usually the pro hustle person, but when it comes to showing, sometimes it's worth it. A lot of times it's not, especially with inflation and after COVID. Shows are perhaps riskier unless... supposedly, right after everybody got their stimulus checks, this was not the case, and a lot of those shows did really, really well. People made a lot of money. It's very difficult when you're signing up for these kind of shows, because you usually have to do so at least 6 months in advance, if not a year, to anticipate those kind of changing market conditions. So it's just a whole other game, and you'll have to decide for yourself whether that's worth it. So most of this concept of the video is geared towards online sales only. Maybe shows could be a supplement for you. But them's the facts. I wish I could paint it more favorably, but It's just not for us. Yeah, so obviously every sales channel that you add has the possibility of accelerating that sales rate. I would say probably best to think about it in the long term and not worry about hitting a particular goal sales rate to make up a portion of your income. And on the whole, with all of this, because it is a risk, I don't recommend quitting your day job right now over it. Let this be a side hustle. Build it up on the side. Take, the 6 months or whatever it takes to design and get the deck ready. And then, as you start to hit the stride, maybe in another 6 months after that, then you can start thinking about replacing that income. But don't sink the ship while you're still on it, obviously. But is this a real thing? Is this a viable way to earn your full-time income? Absolutely. And especially looking at that number, like there are a lot, unfortunately, of job opportunities, even with the wage increases we've seen, that are offering less than that and, draining us of our life essence and not really contributing anything. So if you feel that you have something to say, especially if it's educational, if you feel that you have a concept, do it. This is your invitation. Whatever you do, don't wait, because you might as well. And you don't necessarily know where you're going to be in a year. Future you will thank you watching this video right now for considering, possibly going into this and taking maybe some steps to start accumulating that content and getting this deck put together, because it will be building your legacy and, paying its dividends perhaps for a very long time, especially if you take the hybrid approach. And, you take the lesson, you take the learning, you run the gauntlet, the first run, and it's like, okay, I think I get it. I've done all the shipping. I've moved 500 units. It's a very weird number, right? 500. It sounds like an absurd number. When you're looking at the invoice and paying for them, it's an absolutely absurd number. But when you see them in the boxes, and when you're actually like hitting your stride and selling a couple a day, and you're watching those packages go out the door every day, it's amazing the way that the tangible interaction with these products changes what you notice about the world. And it's deeply educational. If for no other reason you do it, just to have a hobby or have a hustle that potentially can at least pay for itself, if not make you a profit, and will give you so much insight into yourself, what you're capable of, what your strengths and weaknesses are, what your interests are, what things, maybe are better to outsource and get some help with. And, as a journey of self-discovery, I highly, highly recommend self-publishing, whether it's going to be your main bag forever or not. And, if it is, I hope these numbers were helpful for you. Please, obviously, let me know if you have any questions. You can go on Coffee and message me directly, and I'm pretty responsive on there. You can go check out the Etsy shop if you want any, pointers on how to actually put it together. I'm not saying it's the best built shop. It's certainly, I could put more work into it, but it really depends how much work you want to put into it. Like, how many hours do you actually want to have to spend maintaining it? Once all the work is done of this, the fulfillment, it takes me a couple of minutes every day to put the sticker on and put it in the package. It's not bad. So it's basically passive income. Could it be more passive through a traditional publisher? Absolutely, but I don't mind putting stuff in packages. I kind of like putting the little thank you sticker, and I like the tangibility of that. I like watching the mailman shake his head and just be like, what goes on in this strange place every day? I love that feeling. So I guess the closing remarks are, whatever medium that you work in, whether it's, don't be limited, don't be intimidated by this notion of art and having to be a good artist, because a deck can be anything. It can be photography, it can be drawing, it can be painting, it can be digital, it can be AI, it can be sculptural. I'm actually on an oracle deck that I'm working on right now. Came to the conclusion that in order to get the most lively, dynamic poses, I'm actually going to sculpt it first and take a photograph and then do some digital painting over that to get the most immersive dynamic look. So maybe you work in miniatures, maybe you make dioramas, and you want to take photographs of those and think that would be a good deck. I think that would be awesome. Go with the medium that is right for you. You don't have to make it look like everybody else's. That's the whole point of being independent. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope that this was informative. Take care now.